Hello and welcome to Wine This Week with Scott Leek. We're going to be reviewing a underappreciated bold red wine varietal, and in the tip of the week we're going to talk about the rules of engagement when it comes to bringing wine to a dinner party. All of that coming up next. This week's wine is Petite Sirah. It was found in France in the 1800s and quickly transplanted to the United States in the 1880s. And unfortunately, this is about the only place it's found anymore. There's only 10,000 acres or so planted worldwide, but this is actually a pretty popular grape among those who make it and people who like it. It is pretty underappreciated. Now, part of the reason why this is such a great grape, it is very full-bodied. This makes for some really good, bold wines. I think it's a great alternative to Cabernet for those who are looking for a better value play. Now, the name Petite Sirah would indicate maybe this is just a small version of Syrah, and that's somewhat true. It is the child of Syrah, and in France, this grape is known as Durif. It is the child of Syrah and another French grape varietal that is pretty much now extinct and incredibly hard to pronounce, so I'm not going to even bother to try because it doesn't matter. What matters, though, is that this is a bold, bright, very inky, dark wine that has high fruit content, high tannin, high alcohol, high body, and probably some medium acidity. We can expect some dark fruits out of this. And part of the reason for all of these traits is because Petite Sirah, maybe part of why we call it this in English, is the berries are very small. They have some thick skin and they have a lot of what are known as anthocyanins inside of them. Those come from those thick skins and they provide some antioxidants to the wine. So if you're looking for a really healthy wine, we can maybe call this one of those. Now, let's get started tasting. Today's Petite Sirah is produced by Shannon Ridge. It is from the Lake County region in California, which is kind of northeast of Napa Valley. And this is a nice, fairly small production, family-owned facility, but a great value play. This is about a $13 bottle of wine in most places, coming in at 14.8 alcohol, which is, believe it or not, on the low end of what you're going to find with most Petite Sirahs. Now, as I mentioned, this thing is dark. That's actually a really lovely color. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'm going to give it a little swirl for you here, but yeah, beautiful, beautiful color. And there is no chance of me reading what is written on that piece of paper. This is so dark. We're gonna go with a deep garnet label for this color, but man, I love it. Pretty pronounced nose. Like I said, what to expect is what I'm getting here. Very dark fruits. Blackberry, blueberry, maybe even a little prune. There is some vanilla coming through, which is probably from the oak on this. They used some combination of French and American oak for about 9 months. A little bit of maybe some dried herbs coming through. I can't really pinpoint what. But it's a nice nose. This is bold. I just poured this. This thing probably needed a little bit more time and air. I'm guessing a little bit more restrained than it will be in 30 minutes, but we're gonna give it a taste. Wow. Oh my gosh. So, whew. This is powerful. My goodness. So, geez. Immediately, the first thing I felt was the weight of this wine. Like, you want to talk about a full-bodied wine? This is about as full as it gets. That felt like it was lead almost in my mouth, how heavy it was. And then as soon as I swallowed it, whoo, massive astringent drying from the tannins. Very high tannins in this. This thing needs a good ribeye, some powerful meat to go with it. It is definitely a dry wine, and on the acidity, yeah, I'd say this is kind of a medium acidity. I'm salivating a little bit, but man, those tannins are just so intense that it's going to mask the acidity a little bit. Not out of balance, but geez, this is good. Surprisingly, I'm not feeling too much heat on this, and probably because the fruit, man, these are strong tannins. I can barely talk. I don't get a whole lot of heat, and almost 15% alcohol. That's a really impressive feat to not have too much heat coming through. It's so fruit forward though that again, it's covering it up. On that fruit, yes, absolutely dark fruits here. This is tons of blackberry. I'll go with a little bit of prune as well. I'm not getting too much blueberry. It's almost darker than that. So yeah, great dark fruits. A little bit of that vanilla's coming through. I don't know that I really got the spices, the herbs that I smelled, but let me give it one more. Maybe a little bit smoky. I'd say there's probably some dark chocolate, a little bit of pepper as well. This is lovely. This is a really good wine. It's tough to drink by itself. I wouldn't recommend just having this on its own. This is screaming for a steak. Anything, a lamb would probably be good with this as well. This definitely needs food, and anything umami, fat, just to help kind of cut through that those tannins are going to help wash away some of those fats off your tongue and the proteins. This is such a good alternative to Cabernet. So tip for you, if you're at a business dinner, you're looking for a good value play, most Petite Sirah is in California. Like I said, stylistically, this is pretty darn close to Cabernet. And for the price, this is just way better value. You're gonna find most of these in the $10 to maybe $30 range on the high side. So that means at a restaurant, a low-end Petite Sirah, you might be paying 30 bucks for, or maybe upwards of 50, 60 possibly. So I think this is a really good value play, and one that I would have you earmark in your mind for when you're at a business dinner, you're trying to find that good value play on the menu and you want something that's gonna go well with the steak. You should be able to find a Petite Sirah on the menus at most steakhouses, and so this is one that I would really encourage you to go with. Now, scoring this wine, I'm gonna go with, I did that so out of order. I'm out of practice here, people. You gotta bear with me here. I'm gonna score this about 7 points. I could maybe even stretch it to 7.5. It is fairly well balanced. Those tannins are really, really strong and maybe a bit much. Again, by itself, it's kind of hard for me to judge. I'd probably score this higher with a steak. But the tannins do seem slightly overpowering to the acid, but the fruit's there and the alcohol is in balance. So I'm not gonna mark it down too much on the balance. Length of the finish is really good. I didn't talk about that yet. This has a nice long finish, and it doesn't, sometimes when you have high tannins, the finish can end up getting a little bitter. This does not. If anything, it's kind of maybe that finish you would have with like dark chocolate. So that little bit of bitterness, but the fruit and the pleasantness is still there with the finish. Definitely an intense wine. I'm going to give it tons of points for intensity. There's no doubt about that. Complexity wise though, it's not superly complex, but it's a great value play. So all in, I think 7.5 points is probably about the right place to score this. Really enjoyed this, and again, food and wine pairing, this needs food, and something like steak or lamb I think would be an awesome pairing with this. And we're going to talk about food just a bit more here in a moment in the tip of the week. With Thanksgiving coming up this week, I thought this would be an appropriate time to share this particular tip of the week on what are some rules and expectations and etiquette when it comes to bringing a bottle of wine to someone's house when you're invited over for dinner. A lot of us are going to be going over to visit friends and family for the holidays here, and so this I felt was fairly topical. Now, if you're going to someone else's house for Thanksgiving, or any night for dinner for that matter, there's two things that you need to consider and know ahead of time. Number one being, how much should you spend on that bottle of wine? And number two, what are the expectations on whether or not that should be consumed that night? So when it comes to the cost of the wine, the general rule of thumb is, if you were going out to dinner at a restaurant with this host, think about the place you would normally go with them and how much you would be spending on an entree. So if, for example, the person who is hosting you is someone you would normally go out to a really nice restaurant, let's say a Fleming's, you should probably be bringing over a $30, $40 bottle retail price of wine for that host. Now, if your host is someone you normally eat dinner with at a food truck or an Applebee's, maybe $10 to $20 is a more appropriate price range for that bottle of wine. So let that be your guide as to how much to spend based on who your host is for dinner that night. Now, What are the rules and what's the etiquette when it comes to should that bottle be opened that night? If you are a guest and you are bringing a bottle to someone else's house, they are not expected to open it that night. So just know that going in, that even if you're bringing a nice bottle, don't necessarily expect them to open it. Now, there's a few things you can do to maybe influence your host in order to get that bottle opened if you really want to have it as well. So number one, you can call them ahead of time and say, hey, what are we having for dinner? I want to make sure that I bring a bottle of wine that would be a good pairing with the dinner. And maybe during that conversation, you can kind of hash out the expectations right then and there. But that could be a good way to do it. If you want to be really sneaky about it, you can bring a wine like this that is pretty tannic and bold and maybe needs to be breathing a little bit. And you could decant it ahead of time, put the cork back in on the top, let it stick out a little bit, and it's pretty obvious you've opened it, and you can hand it to him saying, I think this is going to go great with dinner tonight. I went ahead and decanted it and let it breathe a little bit. It should be perfectly ready for us by the time dinner's ready. So that's something really sneaky you can do if you want to make sure that your bottle gets consumed that night. But overall, you should come in with expectations that it will not be opened. If you're the host, someone brings you a bottle of wine and you don't want to open it, but maybe you get the impression that they do, that's up to you. You can go ahead and open it if you feel kind of some pressure to do so. Again, etiquette dictates you don't have to. But one thing that you can maybe say is, hey, thank you, this looks great. I'm excited to have this sometime in the near future. And you've kind of put it out there that you're probably not going to be opening it for dinner that night. So those are a couple tips that hopefully help you as you enter into the holiday season, or maybe entertaining others or having invitations extended your way to be entertained at someone else's house. I wish you all a happy, thankful, and safe holiday season, and I will try to keep more videos coming in the next few weeks as well. Thank you for watching Wine This Week with Scott Leek. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please like and subscribe. Just one more quick note on Thanksgiving. I just want to say to all of you who have been watching the videos regularly, I do appreciate your viewership. Thank you so much. It's an honor to present these to you and have a number of you following along on this journey with me. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I hope you are too. Join me next week as we move on to Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris, depending on where it's made. We'll get into that next time. Until then, keep trying new wines, and as always, cheers.